Okay, Amy, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, good morning. All right.
Your live, go
All
ahead.
right. Sorry, we continue to figure this room out. Just know that we are continually working on it, and we will get there. I just am only sad for you that you did not get to hear the audio for Kat's amazing video this morning. So, and for me to figure out the delay. So, we we're getting there. Good morning, everyone. Good morning for those who have joined us here in class, and good morning to those who are live with us on Facebook. We appreciate you all being here for our Sunday morning adult education world religion class. And this morning we are going to be talking about the book Dark Matters by Laurie Boyd, Discovering Wholeness in the Shadows. And so let us start out this morning with a prayer. We gather today knowing that our absolute self is ever present. We are whole, perfect, and complete. Even in those parts of us we call other or not me, as we have learned to hide them away, there is perfection. There is no part of us that is not of God. Today we shine a light into the darkness, set fear aside, and claim those parts of ourselves. We welcome the spiritual growth born in that act, and we affirm, I completely and deeply accept myself. I am whole, perfect, and complete. And so it is. Amen. So again, we'll be discussing Dark Matters, Discovering Wholeness in the Shadows, and that is by Laurie Boyd. Laurie Boyd is an ordained Unity minister, and she has in the past served as president of Unity Worldwide Ministries Great Lakes region, and she is listed as the current minister for Unity of Columbia here in Columbia, Missouri. And she wrote this book in 2015. It is one that I believe we did a small group book study on, so some of you may be familiar with it from that book study. And I'll tell you, it's a tiny book with a lot of bang. So this idea was playing around in my head, and I came across it on my bookshelf, and I thought, oh, I really would like to revisit that material. And once I started digging in, I remembered why I had held on to this book and not released it when I was purging my bookshelf in the past, because there was so much stuff in there that really just resonates and helped me to continue on that spiritual growth cycle. So Laurie states that she had a transformational experience in 2003 while she was on a retreat at Unity Village in Kansas City, Missouri. And one of those experiences was during a guided meditation where she encountered a vision of her shadow self. And when she asked that vision of her shadow self what it was there to do or what it needed from her, the response was to be validated, accepted, and loved. The second experience was during a labyrinth walk, also there on the Unity grounds. And if any of you have not been to Unity or done a labyrinth walk, it really is a wonderful experience. For those of you who don't know, a labyrinth is a circular pattern set out, and it has one way in and one way out. And as you walk, you set an intention and allow things to come for you, and it just can be a very transformational experience. So she again, in that scenario, confronted her shadow self and her doubts of wholeness. During the exercise, she had set the intention for wholeness, and she describes walking the labyrinth to the center, and by the time getting to the center, feeling just this overwhelming feeling of oneness and connection, and that it was so beautiful and magnificent, and she was just feeling like, this labyrinth walk, I did the thing. I made it to the center, and I've had this wonderful experience. That's all anyone can ask for. And as she was walking out of the labyrinth and making that path back to the beginning, her mind started she had the thought come up, do you doubt? Do you doubt your wholeness? And she said what she wanted to, she was trying to force a resounding no, because she had just had this beautiful experience of wholeness in the middle of the labyrinth, and she couldn't get to the no. It wouldn't come up. And so what she was confronting as she walked out of the labyrinth was that there was this part of her that could not believe she was whole because of what she now calls the shadow self, that darkness within her. There was still a part of her that said, if that part exists in me, then I am not truly whole. And so she got out of the labyrinth for the second time and was standing there wrestling with these thoughts, and she was led to enter the labyrinth for a second time. And she said she stood there for a moment thinking, oh my gosh, like, people saw me just come out of the labyrinth. They're going to think that I'm an idiot, that I'm stupid, that I have to go back in. Why would you turn around and go back in? The whole point is you get it one and done. You get it taken care of. But she said she wrestled with that for a second and then decided to listen to that voice that was telling her to go back in the labyrinth. And she turned around and went back in. And she said the first part of walking to the center, she was naming all of those parts of herself that were not whole in her mind, that she was doubting her wholeness. So I am this, I have these thoughts, and she was really starting to feel down. And about halfway through the beginning of the labyrinth, she said she looked up and she saw the trees and how beautiful the grounds were. And she had the thought, so this is the me that whatever, and can still see the beauty of God all around me. This is the me that, that doubts, but recognizes that there is oneness out there. And so then she started walking with that towards the center. And when she got to the center of the labyrinth, before she walked into the center, she made the intention to bring her whole self into the center of the labyrinth, both the light and the dark parts of her, recognizing that even in that darkness, if we truly believe that God is in all things, then those parts of herself could not be excluded from being part of God. And so she stepped into the center of the labyrinth that second time with that thought, and that felt truly whole. And so she considers that a transformational experience for her, that it was the first time she had wrestled with that idea that God was in those parts of her as well. So she states that our culture teaches us to fear the experience of the dark, especially the inner darkness or our shadow self, but that we can learn to step through that fear to another possibility where we accept that darkness, engage it in dialogue, and use it as a tool for our spiritual growth. And that she talks about, for a lot of people, and in some other religious beliefs and things, that there's this idea that the goal is light. The goal is to find the light, to be 100% light, to be living in the light. And she says that she changed that, and feels like it's more beneficial to change that our goal is not to find the light or to be light, but our goal is wholeness. Because in the wholeness, we can discover our oneness. And so true spiritual wholeness is not a denial of the dark side of ourselves, but an embracing of both our inner light and our darkness into an integrated, healthy, transcendent whole. And she says now it's probably normal that some of you are sitting here, or people reading the book, she says it's normal that there's a protest coming up inside you right now, that is saying, my spiritual training taught me that I'm a being of light. I'm an expression of the divine. Darkness is not real. It's only the absence of light. And for her, the answer is yes and no. And so this is the interesting part. And, we've heard it before, and I know Sue has talked about it before. It's just, again, coming to it at a different point in consciousness and a different point for me, and a reminder, and then really thinking it through more fully. So she talks about the absolute versus the relative, and that this is how it can be yes and no, or a yes and, is that in absolute reality, that's the reality that's experienced from the perspective of infinite oneness. And in that reality, we are indeed pure expressions of God. We're radiant, we're whole, we're perfect, we're complete all the time. And there is only good and there is only light, because that is the absolute truth that we know and that we talk about here in Unity all the time. However, we have a relative reality, and that reality is experienced through our 5 human senses and through this human body and through this human experience that we have on this plane. And for that reason, that relative reality is limited in perspective by our human existence, because we are these human beings. We have some limitations within that, and not limitations, I know is a funny word for limitations in how we can experience or how we perceive that initially, would probably be a better way to say that. So this is the reality where infinite oneness is manifesting through this physical universe, and then gets governed a little bit by our limited human ego consciousness. So it gets a little messy in that relative reality, because that humanness is coming in and trying to experience things from a human perspective that are in this absolute realm. And so we're having kind of 2 experiences at the same time. She talks about that there are experiences that can only be had in an environment that includes at least the illusion of separateness. And so she uses some interesting examples. So the illusion of separateness allows oneness to experience relationship. And if you think about that, she says, because relationship requires two-ness. So in order for us to humanly pair off into groups with people and have these dynamic human relationships, there is a separateness from oneness in doing that, but that it's okay, because that is how our absolute self is experiencing relationship. And that's how we experience love. And I like this. She says, in the absolute, we are love. There is nothing but love. But in the relative, we get to experience love from our human bodies. And we get to have people and things to love. And so that was an interesting thought. And that she believes it's not our ultimate goal of this relative experience to escape it and return to the absolute, but to bring our conscious awareness of the absolute into our relative experience. And so for me, that made me think, so it's not the goal for us to just, get to that point one day where we say, I have transcended and I shall be lifted back into the absolute. But to live this human experience, to live in this relative, realm of human life, and know that at all times the absolute is ever present and oneness is ever present. And so it does guide us to a different human experience when we can recognize that, and yet we are still a human being having this experience. So, and she says too, we are both fully human and fully divine at the same time. So we're always carrying that with us. Does anyone have any thoughts? I see a lot of scrunched faces. So, is anything? Yeah.
I was just thinking, when we're talking about the dark and the shadow and the difference and having that even in art, what makes things interesting is the contrast. You have to have those darks and have that contrast in order for things to be interesting. Otherwise, they're just flat. And I think it's the same thing with us as humans. What makes us interesting, what gives us character, are those shadow things that we go through. You look at people who are amazing, and they're people who have gone through some stuff. They're people who have experienced tragedy, they've experienced things that have been really, really hard. And it is those shadows things that makes them interesting, that makes them empathetic, that makes them love deeper and stronger. And so we have to have that in order to really be able to live fully. You know, that's what makes things beautiful.
Absolutely. So in case those of you at home couldn't hear, Mary was saying that, even within art, you have to have lights and darks to make a contrast, to make things interesting. And it's interesting, she uses that in the beginning of the book. She talks about a particular art style, and I am not an art person, so I probably can't pronounce the word, but that is the style that's used in the cover art. There's a specific style where it's mostly dark, and the subject that the artist is trying to highlight has all of the lightness and the brightness, but you kind of don't see everything in the background of those images. Absolutely. And so she then goes on to talk about creating boundaries, that we start to create these boundaries in our human experience, and that we actually create this separate relative self as we go through our developmental stages. And that is what we do to create a sense of identity. And so she talks about 3 boundaries that we all create just in the course of becoming human, of learning how to do this human thing that we come into. And so the first is the skin boundary. And she says, so when we're in the womb, we are quite literally one with our mother, right? There's no separation between us and our environment in the womb. And then we're born, and she says they feel like at first, when we are infants, we don't recognize that separation has happened. And it takes a while for us to slowly begin to develop this sense of physical separation from our mother. And then we start to experience, as we get older, and we start to figure out that we have fingers and toes and arms that we can move, and we start to do things, that we start experiencing the difference between putting our own toes in our mouth versus putting a toy in our mouth. And even at that young age, we start to label things as me and not me. So I can discover different parts of my body, and that's me. And I can feel it feels different. Or I can explore objects around me, and I start to think of those as a young child as that's not me, that's a thing that's outside of myself. And so that's how we first start creating the skin boundary of everything that's connected to me in my skin is me, and everything outside of that is not me. Then we start to grow and develop, and we start to recognize, oh, I have thoughts. I have a mind, and I have thoughts. There's this internal dialogue happening in my head, and we start to draw a boundary between our thoughts and actions and our body. And so we start to think, we start to recognize our thoughts as me and my body as mine. So we start to think, I am what I'm thinking, and I have this body. I carry it around with me. It's mine. It belongs to me, but it is not necessarily me, because my me is up here. It's in this thinking center. It's all these thoughts that I'm having. So again, to say that again, so I am my thoughts, and I have a body in this human experience that I carry around with me. Then, as we get older, we start to become aware of social and cultural rules, and and we start to label things as acceptable and unacceptable, things that will get us included, things that will get us excluded. And so we get a lot of messages about that, right? And depending on what family you grew up in, or what culture you grew up in, you get a lot of different messages. And she says, a lot of those messages are intended, the person giving that message intends it often from a place of love or safety. They're trying to protect you. They're trying to help you fit in. They're wanting good things for you, and so they're trying to usher you into these acceptable or good behaviors. But what we start to do is draw a boundary between our thoughts and actions that are acceptable and those that are not. And of course, because we want to fit in and we want to do what is expected of us, we start to label the thoughts and behaviors that are deemed acceptable as me. Oh, that's me. If I'm doing what's right and good and acceptable, well, that has to be me, because that's who I want to be. And then the other thoughts and behaviors, oh, that's not me. And I won't get into it today, but she even has there's a whole chapter in the book called "The Devil Made Me Do It," and the whole idea, like some of that idea that gets in there, that if I'm on a path that I deem as acceptable and good, that's me. But if I'm having thoughts or actions that are not in congruence with that, then oh, that must be the devil. That's the devil trying to influence me. That's the devil. So like that's where some of that. I wanted to use the word mythology, but it's probably not a good word to use. But that's where some of that comes into play, where people get so invested in that idea of the devil and this evil force on the outside pushing in and trying to influence their life, because we don't want to own those parts of us that we don't deem as acceptable. So you gotta blame somebody. Yeah, it's a nice thought to say, well, that's not me. There's this outside force, and I mean, it's always there, just trying to influence me and get me off track. But there's a danger in not being able to claim those thoughts and ideas and actions. And that's what she'll talk about. So she talks about the persona and the shadow self. So this is the terminology that Carl Jung used, was the persona and the shadow. And so he defined the persona as the persona self as our conscious mind and those aspects of ourselves that we allow others to see. So it's the forward facing, this is my persona, look how well I can fit in and be acceptable, and I have all these beautiful, lovely thoughts, and this is what you should see. And then, and so Laurie calls that our light side. When she's talking about the light and the dark, she's talking about the persona as our light. And the shadow is our subconscious mind, or specifically those aspects of our personality that we have either rejected, forgotten, or repressed. So it's all the stuff that we don't want anyone to see. That's our shadow. The thoughts that we don't say out loud because we don't know how they will be received, or we've said them out loud before and it did not go well, so we never say it again. We lock it away and keep it hidden, sometimes even from ourselves. And so the darkness in those aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, the thoughts and behaviors that we have labeled as undesirable, may often be things that are attached to feelings of discomfort or shame. And I think we can all admit that we're really good at locking away things that create discomfort and shame, right?
Until you get really old.
Yeah.
And you say what you think and don't care what anybody thinks. That's true.
So the comment was until you get old, and then you just say and do whatever you want. So that's good.
Speak for yourself.
So. So we attempt to hide these parts from others, and the amazing thing to me, this mind we have is just so incredible that we are even capable of hiding things away from ourselves. We are so good at repressing these thoughts and feelings and ideas that we can lock them away into a part of our mind that we even forget they're there. But the interesting thing is that even though we forget they are there, they're still influencing our other actions and behaviors. We don't get rid of them. We just think we have, or we've convinced ourselves that we're not being impacted by that part of our mind. And so that's what she said. The problem with boundaries is that this process of creating boundaries and separateness, it seems to be a perfectly normal and possibly necessary part of human experience. It's how we build a strong sense of conscious identity. It's one of the characteristics that makes us human. But Laurie's come to believe that the relative and the absolute are two aspects of the whole that some of us call God. And so by locking away half of what is God inside us, we're really creating a lot of interesting dynamics to live out in this human experience.
But maybe that's for protection. Like a child who sees the mother kill the father, but they don't have any memory of it. So maybe the God part in us helps us not remember that until we're old enough to understand it and take it.
That's an interesting, and so I think in reading this, I think what Laurie would say is that's another yes and. So yes, maybe in the moment, and to achieve that complete sense of wholeness, we have to heal that part of ourselves and get through it, or there's always going to be this part that's locked away and defined as other
As a child.
in our own mind. Right, yeah. So maybe that's work for you to do as an adult when you can have a greater understanding of everything that happened there. So she says, so as we're having this relative experience, we're also reminded continually of our oneness. So we're not only experiencing love in the relative, but we know that in the absolute realm, we are love. And that sometimes I read these things, I don't know about any of you, but I feel like they are like mind blow moments where if you really, like you read it and you go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then you really start to think about it and you're like, okay, so I'm having this relative experience and this absolute experience at the same time, and I'm experiencing love, but I am love. It really triggers a lot of thought for me. So I don't know if any of you share that sometimes I'll read through something and maybe it's a day later or 2 days later, and I start to really like hone in on that sentence or that phrase and like, what does that really mean for me, like in this now moment, and trying to think out through all the aspects of that. It's also why I drove my mother crazy as a child, because I would ask her these questions and she would say, go play. I don't know. Go play. So for most of our culture, the emphasis is put on creating a strong sense of self in the relative world that allows us to be comfortable and to even thrive. But it also creates a situation where we may never wake up to our absolute self if we just stay in this comfort zone of creating a relative self, a persona that is accepted by everyone that we encounter. It really keeps us from waking up and connecting to that absolute self. And that the problem with that is that we also create a polarity of the relative self. So within our relative self, we're splitting ourselves into the me and the not me, the persona and the shadow, the light and the dark. So again, we've like created this separateness within our relative experience, which makes it harder to get to that wholeness, makes it harder for us to feel connected to the oneness. And so polarity is an issue that seems to require an either or choice, and yet it's unresolvable. And this idea was interesting to me too. So examples of polarities that she gives, so tradition and innovation. They're different sides of, the same thing. And so it would seem that you either have to choose tradition or you have to choose innovation, comfort and growth, alone time and social time. And what she says is that instead of an either or problem, it's a both and process. So there's value at both ends of the polarity. There may be some things that there's value in remaining traditional with your response. And there may be other situations where innovation is what's going to get you where you want to be. And so we have to manage it by looking at the whole versus choosing whatever end we like best or whatever end feels most comfortable at any given time, and truly look at what's best for the whole and where do I need to fall within this. And that maybe it can be more of a continuum versus a this or that. And so in the polarity of our relative self, we tend to label the light as good and the dark as bad. And then we mistakenly believe our goal is to eliminate everything that's labeled dark. Because if it's bad, I want to eliminate it and get rid of it. And she said, so we deny and repress it. We try to live only in the light. But the thing is that trying to eliminate the dark never works. And we'll end up in a lifelong internal battle where we're fighting against ourselves, right? Because no one else created there was influences, but we have created all of that within our internal relative self. And so truly we're having this like epic battle in our own persona and in our own experience. So she says the good news in all of this is that whether we know it or not consciously, we are always our absolute self at the same time. And so our absolute self is out there pulling and pushing our relative self towards our awareness and our wholeness. So our absolute self is, sending in those thoughts or setting up situations that allow us to find our wholeness. So then she talks about dissolving some of these boundaries, that we have the ability through regular practice and through intention to start dissolving some of these boundaries and blurring the lines so that we're closer to our absolute self and that we can feel that wholeness. And so she says we can reverse the process by intentionally and methodically expanding our consciousness to reclaim the parts of our relative self that we've rejected and wake up to an awareness of our absolute self or conscious wholeness. We do that first through radical self-acceptance. So we can't pretend away the parts of ourselves that we don't like. We have to accept ourselves as we truly are. And we cannot heal that which we will not allow ourselves to see. So we have to confront it. We have to be aware of it, or we're still being influenced by it and not understanding why we're not getting where we want to be going, or why we're still having these thoughts and feelings. So we have to look at those thoughts and behaviors that we feel guilt or shame about, inadequacy, unworthiness, and we have to begin accepting what is. And so she says, we acknowledge the thing, I have thought or done whatever, and I feel guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, afraid about that, and this is what it is. This is what is. And just accept it as a thing, a fact. It's, that this is a feeling that I'm having about this thing, or this thought, and that we look at the qualities in others that we find irritating or frustrating, and we try to uncover the repressed thought or belief in our darkness that is signaling us through that irritation. So I had a friend, and I think it comes from like 12-step, whatever. She would always say, if you spot it, you got it. And so what Laurie is saying too is that we can't recognize qualities in others that we don't at least identify with a little bit in our own selves. And so if we're really frustrated or irritated with someone about something, it's probably triggering an internal light, dark, persona, shadow boundary that we've created, and it's bringing up those emotions. And so she says, look, that's a good way to look at things that you might need to bring up and heal. And so you can set the conscious intention of releasing the feeling of shame, unworthiness, or so on. We can contemplate, where did this belief even come from? Why do I even have these thoughts? And that only by letting that belief go can we reclaim that portion of ourselves. And she uses an example of something a story about a husband who wants to clean his garage, and so he sets this intention, I'm going to clean the garage today, but then gets out there, and the part of himself that doesn't want to clean the garage starts to take over, and he gets sidetracked he's reading magazines that he finds in a tub, he's sitting, I need a coffee break, he's doing all these things other than cleaning the garage. And the part of himself that wanted to do that keeps going, hey, I thought we were out here to clean the garage. It's going to be so nice when the garage is organized. And the other part of him is saying, but I found this really cool thing I'm going to tinker with for, an hour and all of that. And so there's really this internal battle going on. And then she talks about the wife comes out and just innocently says, hey, honey, how's it going? and he erupts and says, "Oh my gosh, get off my back. I'm doing it. I'm out here. I've been out here for hours." And so what she's saying is like, there was likely some part of like, she didn't come out. If she just comes out saying, "How's it going, honey?" That's what she's probably really asking is, "How's it going, honey?" But internally there was some shadow thought of, she thinks I'm lazy, or she thinks I can't do it. I'm not good enough for her. There was something hiding in the shadow that created that response. And so that was an example from her about just like a normal everyday encounter we have with someone, where our response is based way more on some internal thought or belief about ourselves than what the person who was coming to interact with us even had in their mind or had intended from that interaction. So that's the part of looking at those things. Yeah, Mary?
I think that that goes back to, what was the book about talking about your that inner dialogue, that inner voice that's constantly talking to you.
Was that Untethered Soul?
Yes,
That's a
that
good one.
where it is, and I find myself in that so much, where I am having this whole dialogue in my head, and I'm thinking all these things, and that I'm not even conscious of that I'm thinking, and then somebody comes along and says something, and I am so reacting to what's happening, this dialogue I've had in my head that has nothing to do with anything in reality. And so I think, I know I do that all the time, and then all of a sudden I'm in this funk, and it's like, what's wrong with you? Nothing. I'm fine, okay? But
Yeah.
it's this whole thing that I've had in my head, and you get caught up in that guilt and that shame because you haven't done this and you haven't done that, and you're just overwhelmed. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do, and then you get in this whole shame.
Yeah. And in that moment, that husband may have no conscious awareness that he is thinking the thoughts, "She thinks I'm not good enough," or "She thinks I'm lazy," or "I think I'm lazy." He, in his mind, if you asked him, 15 minutes after that conversation, his perception may very well be, "Oh my gosh, my wife was nagging me to death about getting this garage clean," because there wasn't a conscious thought. And so that's what she's saying, is we have to consciously investigate those types of situations, or look at those things to start blurring this persona shadow line. So that, and we've talked about this so much in Unity, that instead of just having that big response, or when you do, getting to that place where you quickly go, "Oh, well, that was interesting. That was a lot of emotion around that. Why did that happen? What was going on with me? What thought might have led me to have that response? Is that really true? Was that interaction, is my perception of that interaction a true perception, or was I being clouded by something else that was going on?"
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but maybe this is why there's so many divorces. You know, well, really.
Well, just strained human relationships in general. Because we don't often, I'm sure that a lot of you as students of Unity are a little more aware as well if you've been doing this work. And so it really throws people off when you actually address these thoughts and feelings. I know this happens to me at work when I will revisit something and go back and say, "I just want to let you know the story that I was telling myself in my head was that you thought this, this, and this. And now I've thought about it, and I realize that might not be true. So I would like to give you an opportunity to tell me where you were coming from with that." And people just kind of stand stunned for a minute. And they're getting used to me, but they usually just kind of, especially my newer employees, it's like, "Is this a trap? Is this a trick? Is my boss, like, is she trying to catch me in something?" And then other people, "No, that's just Amy. Like, she really wants you to tell her what you were thinking, and it's okay. Whatever that was, it's okay." But it really, because people are not used to consciously doing this work in their everyday life, sometimes it really throws people off when you're doing that. Yes.
You know what?
Oh.
I like to use her metaphor of art, because with my mother, who was an artist, we might be sitting in a restaurant, and she might be looking at a painting where we might be visiting or something, and she might say, you know what's wrong with that painting? It doesn't have a clear direction where the light is coming from. And to me, that's a metaphor for my life. I always need to know where the light is coming from, and I always need to have access to that light. And it was very interesting to me that she painted the front door of the church where I was raised in, and the light came from within, out. That was different than most of her other paintings. And I noticed that the last painting that she did was never finished in her life. There was difficulty in finding which direction the light was from, which may have been a metaphor for what she was going through there at the end of her life. But in our life, if we always know where the light is coming from, no matter how separate we get within us or how separate we get from other people, we will revert back to God is always present. God is here, God is now, God is always present, God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and that then gets us back to recognizing, acknowledging, and accepting the light. And so all of those separated parts, we often need to question. And I've had parents, when I taught at the university, I've had parents say to me, my child is getting off track. And I said, you know, it's good to question, especially our religious beliefs, because so many of us are indoctrinated in beliefs that don't function well for us once we want to be successful adults. But it's always good to question, and I'm never afraid of education or questioning or knowledge. I'm always afraid of or concerned about ignorance or darkness or an ability to accept the light. And one of the things she's saying is that it's important to go back to the light. And now I think that's why she went back in the labyrinth at that one point, is to again recoup the light.
Oh, sure. I think that's really a good observation, because that is what she was saying, is that when she went out the first time, she had lost that feeling of wholeness and oneness. She had gotten into this idea of she had all these parts of herself that she couldn't possibly be whole. And she felt like that was the urging, was, nope, you need to turn around and go back in and figure this out while it's coming up for you right now. So that's awesome. So I'm going to go through, there's just a couple more things. This is a great topic. We could probably talk about this all day. So she also says that as we begin to blur that persona shadow boundary, we start to dissolve the other boundaries as well. So that mind-body boundary, we start to realize that we are not separate from our bodies, and that we realize what we reject moves into our bodies, and what our bodies rejects moves into our mind. Like there's this whole relationship going on there, and that it's happening all the time, whether or not we're aware of it. And so she says we have to, we start to realize, and this is what many of us know, that when we are storing dark, negative thoughts in our bodies, we can do considerable damage, and we create the relative experiences of stress, heart disease, hypertension, other things. And that when we start to realize the mind and body are one, we can use that knowledge to create balance and be much kinder to our bodies. And we can see miraculous things happen, like we have, like we know here at Unity with Myrtle Fillmore, with Charles Fillmore. When you dissolve that mind-body barrier, wonderfully miraculous things can happen. We also start to dissolve the skin boundary. As the other two start to fall away, we start to have more awareness of how deeply we're interconnected to the world around us. We become consciously aware of how our thoughts and behaviors are impacting our environment, and we start to let go of this boundary and operate at a different level of responsibility to our part in the creation and the impact on our relative world. Amazing. And so what we're really doing is seeing through the illusion. We start to see through the illusion of the separateness. And as we dissolve those boundaries of the relative self, we have a growing awareness of the absolute self. We can truly know that those two selves are one and that we are infinite oneness. We can realize that we're whole, and we always have been. That's the thing. We always have been. That absolute self is always there, pulling and pushing and guiding. And so it's not something we have to find. It's just something we have to remember and become aware of, because it's always there. And in doing this, we uncover the false beliefs that are lying at the root of our relative suffering. We increase our capacity for compassion. We're able to forgive both others and ourselves for all of those parts of ourselves that we weren't so sure about. And we create space to make wiser choices in our thoughts, behaviors, and actions that will bring us even closer in alignment with our absolute self. So we start to have discernment, that conscious discernment of what is pulling and pushing us towards our absolute self. That's a lot, right? So I know this is one of those that I like dove in, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I need to concentrate on and bring? And there's just so much good stuff, and continuing to do the work. I am going to send everyone home, and then we'll figure out how to put online. She has some spiritual practice activities and some meditations in the book that were just really wonderful about getting in touch with that shadow self. And so I've made a little handout of a couple of those spiritual practice activities that you can choose to do if you would like. And like I said, we'll figure out how to get that online as well. So this is the part where I remind you that our ministry, and when I say that, I mean our ministry, we are this ministry, depends on our support not only in time and talent, but also with our treasure. And I will just tell you, I choose to give my time, talent, and treasure to this ministry, not because it's perfect, because we're all on a path of growing and becoming who we're truly meant to be, but because it's the place that I feel most supported to continue on my path of spiritual growth. This is the community of individuals. These are the classes. These are the activities and the experiences that are being held here at all times that have truly been life-changing in my life, and I know the stories of other people in this community that it has been life-changing for them as well. And so when I look at where I'm going to give my time, talent, and treasure, I say, I want this place to continue to be here for me, for all of you, and for all of those people out there that haven't yet found us, but they're on the path to getting here. We want it to be here, and we want it to be robust when they do find this spiritual home. And I do, when I don't say very often, I'm going to my church. I say a lot of times, I'm headed to my spiritual home. Because that message is impactful when I say that, when we say that to other people, like, oh, I'm going to my spiritual home this Sunday, or my spiritual home's having an event. There's a different feeling around that. So if you feel called to financially support the mission of Unity of Springfield, you can do so in a variety of ways. There's a basket going around here in the room. You can pay through Tithely, which is a wonderful app that you get to control how much you give and all of that. We have a PayPal, ccunity@sbcglobal.net. You can throw a check in the mail, or better yet, come join us on a Sunday and be here in person and drop something in the basket. If you feel called to give your time and talent, see the office staff or Lisa Landrigan, our volunteer coordinator, and they can tell you about all of the volunteer opportunities and the current needs that we have here at Unity of Springfield. So that's my soapbox about that.
Amy, I want
Yes.
to say bravo on this. This was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I loved that book. It was amazing. But you guys are going to crack up today at my talk, because you're going to see how many things from this morning that I'm going to be talking about today.
We keep doing that without talking to
know.
each other. So it's
we don't
interesting.
talk to each other, so it's pretty cool. But I just want to share like a personal experience, and Paul doesn't. I'm going to Surprise! You know, because we got together later in life. You know, yes. I think he's kind of used to it. He's just like, oh God.
You're a foil.
What's she gonna say now?
In her journey.
Yes. So, you know, we got together later in life, and so we're both very independent. We both run our own lives and our own homes. And so as you're talking about this morning and the old stuff that comes up, we've been doing a lot of work together on our home, and it's been so interesting for me because Paul's used to doing things the way that he does them. I'm used to doing things the way that I do them. And so I've noticed he'll say something to me like, well, honey, you know, don't forget to do this. And, you know, my little kind of old trigger thing is like, I know. I've done this for so many years on my own. I know how to do it, you know.
And my way's better.
But it just, when you were talking about your example, and I was like, that's so true that it comes from my past. It comes from my dad was a perfectionist. I could never do things really the way that he could. You know, it was like he always did it better. And so it triggers me when he says something like that to get defensive. And when in fact, his intention, and he'll say to me, honey, I know you can do it. I know you can do things really good too. I just had to share that because it's just a perfect example of me looking at my stuff and saying, is this even relevant to our relationship? No, it's not relevant at all. It's relevant to a past wound.
So don't make it relevant.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So share it publicly.
There's that foil coming.
There you go.
Shine light on it.
Oh, that's great.
So thank you for this. This is just really great.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us online. I know we have several that are watching with us right now, and we always have a lot of views after, so we appreciate you being here and hope to see you here on a Sunday sometime soon. Paul, do you have some announcements? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
No.
told you I didn't have any announcements, and there are a couple very important things that I do have to say. First of all, thank you so much, Amy. This was fantastic. As always. And the next 2 Sundays, I want everybody to know we do have a couple of very special people coming and doing our class, and that's going to be Reverend Pat and Reverend Les. And they're going to be talking about some of their experiences and their wisdom from Unity and Unity Village in their own lives and at Unity Village. So be here and or get online, whichever. And the other thing is, as always, for years now, we've always closed out at the back of the room in a circle.